Racist cop drags black woman out of a restaurant, but her hidden role leaves him speechless. In this compelling video, we delve into a shocking incident that took place in a bustling restaurant where tensions escalated dramatically. A police officer's actions sparked outrage as he forcibly removed a black woman from the premises. This unsettling event quickly garnered attention, raising questions about racial bias and the use of excessive force. However, the unfolding story reveals unexpected twists that leave everyone reevaluating their initial judgments. If you are enthusiastic about this narrative, please inform us. If you appreciated the video, press 1. If not, select 0. Your feedback genuinely motivates me to collect additional uplifting and significant narratives.
Angela Carter sat in the corner of a bustling, high-end restaurant, her sharp eyes scanning the room under the guise of casual interest. Dressed in a modest yet elegant outfit, she exuded the poise of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations. To anyone watching, she might have seemed like a woman simply enjoying her afternoon meal, but Angela was far from ordinary. A seasoned Secret Service agent, she was there not for leisure but for duty. Her target, a middle-aged man with a confident demeanor and a suspicious air, sat 3 tables away, engrossed in a conversation with a woman who seemed equally out of place in the luxurious setting. Angela was on high alert, her instincts finely tuned to every movement, every glance exchanged between the two. The mission was straightforward in theory but fraught with potential complications: monitor the suspect, confirm the nature of the exchange taking place, and call in the team if necessary. She had done this countless times, yet the stakes always felt just as high. Today, the target was suspected of being a key player in a network trafficking sensitive government information. Angela had no room for error. She carefully sipped her coffee, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. The suspect reached into his briefcase, retrieving a thin folder that he slid across the table to his companion. Angela's pulse quickened. This could be the confirmation she needed. Meanwhile, across the street, Officer Tom Daniels sat in his patrol car, parked idly on the curb. Daniels was in a foul mood. His morning had been filled with frustration and unresolved dispute with his ex-wife, mounting debt, and the lingering sting of a disciplinary hearing that had not gone in his favor. Patrolling the upscale district was a dull assignment for someone like Daniels, who thrived on exerting authority in more chaotic parts of the city. Yet here he was, reduced to responding to petty complaints from wealthy patrons. His radio crackled, and a monotone dispatcher's voice informed him of a call about suspicious behavior reported in the vicinity of the restaurant. Daniels perked up, his boredom replaced by the anticipation of action. It wasn't much, but it was something. He turned off the engine, stepped out of the car, and adjusted his uniform before striding toward the restaurant with the confidence of a man eager to assert control. Inside, Angela remained focused, her peripheral vision catching every detail of the room. She noticed a man at the bar watching her a little too intently and wondered briefly if he was part of the operation or just a curious diner. She ignored him, keeping her attention on the target. As the suspect's companion opened the folder, her expression shifted, slightly subtle but noticeable to someone trained to read body language. Angela's instinct screamed that something significant was happening. She reached under the table, her fingers brushing the concealed communication device strapped to her thigh. Just then, the restaurant's glass doors swung open, and in walked Officer Daniels, his imposing presence cutting through the hume of conversation. Daniels scanned the room with a practiced air of authority, his gaze quickly settling on Angela. Something about her stood out, a quiet confidence, an intensity that didn't align with the casual demeanor of the other patrons. To Daniels, she was immediately suspicious. She didn't belong here, he decided, not in the way the other diners did. His biases, deeply ingrained and rarely questioned, kicked in. He approached her table, his boots clicking against the polished floor. Angela noticed him immediately but gave no outward sign of recognition. Instead, she calmly stirred her coffee, her mind racing as she assessed the situation. "Ma'am," Daniel said, his tone sharp and authoritative. "Can I have a word with you?" Angela looked up, her expression neutral. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked evenly, her voice betraying none of her irritation. Daniels placed his hands on his hips, his posture radiating dominance. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," he said, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "And you seem out of place." Angela raised an eyebrow, her calm demeanor unwavering. "I'm not sure what you mean," she replied. "I'm just having coffee." Daniels wasn't buying it. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice but maintaining his aggressive tone. "Why don't you tell me what you're really doing here?" Angela's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She knew his type, an officer who wielded his badge like a weapon, driven more by ego than by a genuine desire to serve. "I don't see how that's any of your concern," she said firmly, though her tone remained polite. Daniel's eyes flicked to the table, where her phone and a small notebook lay. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, though it was more a demand than a question. Angela sighed inwardly. This was exactly the kind of complication she didn't need. Her target was still seated a few tables away, seemingly unaware of the brewing confrontation, but she couldn't risk drawing attention. "I'm afraid I'll have to decline," she said, her voice calm but resolute. Daniel straightened, his face hardening. "Decline her. That's not how this works." He reached for her notebook, but Angela's hand shot out, intercepting his. Her grip was firm, her eyes locked onto his with a steely intensity that momentarily gave him pause. "I suggest you think very carefully about your next move, officer," she said, her tone low and measured. Daniels yanked his hand back, his pride stung. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he snapped. Angela leaned back in her chair, her expression unbothered. "I'm not the one escalating this situation," she replied. By now, a few nearby diners were starting to take notice, their murmurs adding to the tension in the air. Daniels, unwilling to back down, gestured toward the door. "Step outside," he ordered. Angela didn't move. "I'm fine right here," she said coolly. Her defiance only fueled Daniel's anger. The standoff was interrupted by a sudden commotion at the target's table. The suspect had noticed the scene unfolding and was now hurriedly gathering his things. Angela's heart sank. The mission was unraveling, and she needed to act fast. Daniels, oblivious to the larger stakes, was still focused entirely on her. Angela made a split-second decision. She stood abruptly, her movements smooth and controlled. "If you'll excuse me, officer," she said, brushing past him and heading toward the target. Daniels grabbed her arm, his grip rough and unyielding. "You're not going anywhere," he barked. Angela reacted instinctively, twisting free with a practiced motion that sent Daniels stumbling. The room fell silent as diners froze, their eyes darting between the two. Angela turned to face him, her posture relaxed but ready. "I suggest you let me do my job," she said, her voice carrying a weight that silenced even the murmurs. Daniels, red-faced and seething, reached for his radio. "I'm calling this in," he spat. Angela didn't flinch. Instead, she glanced at her watch and said calmly, "You've just made a very big mistake." Officer Tom Daniels stood frozen for a moment, the weight of Angela Carter's words hanging in the air between them. He wasn't used to being challenged, least of all by someone so calm, so unflinching in the face of his authority. It unnerved him in a way he couldn't explain, feeding the irritation already simmering beneath his skin. Around them, the restaurant buzzed with a tense energy. the subtle hum of whispered conversations, and the occasional clink of cutlery as Patri tried to appear as though they weren't watching. But Angela could feel every set of eyes on her, even as she maintained an outward air of composure. Daniels clenched his jaw, his pride demanding he reassert control over the situation. "You think you can just walk away from this?" he said, his voice low and sharp, though it was clear he wanted the whole room to hear him. Angela didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a deliberate breath, her eyes flicking past him to the man at the table across the room. Her target was getting restless, glancing around nervously as if debating whether to make a move. Time was running out, and Daniels, in his ignorant determination, was jeopardizing everything. Angela turned back to Daniels, her expression steady. "Officer," she said, her tone measured but carrying an undeniable edge, "you're interfering with something you don't understand. Walk away." A simple statement was like throwing fuel on a fire. Daniel's face darkened, his hand instinctively moving to his belt, fingers brushing the edge of his holstered baton. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he shot back, his voice rising. He wasn't yelling, but the menace in his tone was unmistakable. Angela didn't flinch. She had faced worse than this men with far more power in situations with far higher stakes. But what made this moment particularly frustrating was how utterly unnecessary it was. Daniels wasn't a calculated adversary or a threat tied to her mission. He was an obstacle, a small man with a badge and an ego he couldn't keep in check. She could end this right now, reveal her credentials, pull rank, and watch as his bravado crumbled under the weight of her authority. But that wasn't an option. Not yet. The mission depended on her maintaining her cover, and she couldn't risk exposing herself not until the target was secure. "I'm giving you one last chance to cooperate," Daniels said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a near growl. "Step outside with me, or I'll make you step outside." Angela raised an eyebrow, the corner of her mouth twitching into something that might have been mistaken for a smile if not for the cold steel in her eyes. "I wouldn't recommend trying that," she said simply. Before Daniels could respond, there was a sharp crash from across the room. The target had knocked over his chair in his haste to stand, drawing the attention of everyone in the restaurant. Angela's stomach tightened. This was it. The target was spooked, and she had seconds to act before he bolted. Ignoring Daniels completely, she stepped around him and began moving toward the man, her strides purposeful but unhurried enough not to draw immediate suspicion. Behind her, Daniels barked something unintelligible, his voice taut with anger, but Angela didn't stop. Her focus was singular now, every muscle in her body attuned to the escalating situation. The target grabbed the folder from the table and turned toward the exit, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. Angela's hand went to the concealed device on her thigh, her fingers brushing the button that would alert her team. But before she could activate it, Daniels was in front of her again, blocking her path. His face was flushed, his breathing uneven, and his hand was now firmly gripping the baton at his side. "I said you're not going anywhere," he snapped, his voice carrying an edge of triumph, as if he believed he had finally asserted his dominance. Angela's patience snapped. "Step aside," she said, her tone no longer measured but cutting, each word laced with authority. For a moment, something flickered in Daniel's eyes, hesitation, perhaps, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "I don't know who you think you are," he said, his voice low, "but you don't give me orders." The room seemed to hold its breath. Angela glanced over Daniel's shoulder. The target was nearing the exit, fumbling with the handle of the door. She was out of time. Without another word, she shifted her weight slightly, her movements fluid and precise. In one swift motion, she sidestepped Daniels, her shoulder brushing past him as she moved toward the door. But Daniels wasn't done. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm and yanking her back with more force than was necessary. The room gasped as Angela stumbled slightly, catching herself before she could fall. Daniels didn't let go. His grip was iron, his fingers digging into her arm as he glared at her. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper but thick with venom. Angela met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Then, with a calculated movement, she twisted her arm, breaking his grip with ease. Daniels staggered back a step, his face a mask of shock and anger. "You just made a very big mistake," Angela said, her voice calm but deadly. She didn't wait for his response. Turning on her heel, she moved toward the door, her hand going to the device on her thigh. But before she could press the button, Daniels lunged at her, his baton raised. The movement was reckless, driven by emotion rather than strategy, and Angela saw it coming a mile away. She sidestepped again, her hand darting out to grab his wrist and twist it just enough to make him drop the baton. The weapon clattered to the floor, and Daniels let out a sharp grunt of pain. Angela released him, stepping back just as the door to the restaurant swung open. Her target was gone, and in his place stood two uniformed officers, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern as they took in the scene before them. Daniels, red-faced and disheveled, was still clutching his wrist, while Angela stood tall, her breathing steady, her eyes hard. "She assaulted me," Daniels barked, his voice cracking slightly. The officers exchanged a glance, clearly uncertain about how to proceed. Angela sighed, her fingers brushing against the device on her thigh one last time before she activated it. A soft beep sounded, barely audible over the murmurs of the restaurant, but it was enough. Help was on the way. Angela turned to the officers, her expression calm but resolute. "This man interfered with a federal operation," she said, her voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. "And now he's going to face the consequences." Angela Carter stood tall, her unwavering composure contrasting sharply with the chaotic energy now surging through the restaurant. The two officers who had just arrived exchanged uncertain glances, clearly caught off guard by the scene unfolding in front of them. Daniels, his face twisted with anger and humiliation, pointed at Angela with his uninjured hand. "She assaulted me," he barked again, his voice rising. He stepped forward, attempting to assert himself, but the confidence he once exuded was now faltering under the weight of the situation. Angela kept her gaze locked on him, her expression calm but piercing. The baton still lay on the polished floor between them, an unmistakable symbol of the line Daniels had crossed. "I suggest you think carefully about your next words, Officer Daniels," she said, her voice low and deliberate, every syllable dripping with authority. "You're in deep enough as it is." One of the newly arrived officers, a younger man with a cautious demeanor, raised a hand in a tentative attempt to de-escalate the situation. "Ma'am," he began, his tone measured, "can you explain what's going on here?" Officer Daniels called for backup. "We just need to get a clear picture." Angela didn't respond immediately. Her mind was racing, calculating her next move with precision. The mission was already compromised, her target had slipped away during the commotion, and she had no choice but to prioritize controlling the fallout. Her hand lingered near the concealed device on her thigh, a silent reminder that her team was already on its way. The trick was buying enough time for them to arrive without further inflaming the situation. Daniels, however, had no intention of letting the matter rest. He gestured wildly at Angela, his face flushed with frustration. "This woman," he spat, "refused to comply with my orders. She resisted arrest, assaulted an officer, and obstructed my investigation." He turned to the younger officer, his voice taking on a note of desperation. "You saw what she just did. She disarmed me. She's dangerous." Angela's eyes narrowed slightly, though she kept her tone steady. "Dangerous," she repeated, the faintest hint of incredulity in her voice. She took a slow step forward, her movements deliberate and controlled, and tilted her head slightly as if examining Daniels like a puzzle she'd already solved. "The only danger here," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade, "is an officer so blinded by his own ego that he can't see the bigger picture." Daniels bristled, his hand instinctively going to his belt as if reaching for a weapon that was no longer there. The gesture was both futile and revealing, a testament to how rattled he had become. The younger officer hesitated, his gaze darting between Angela and Daniels as he tried to piece together the truth. Meanwhile, his partner, an older officer with a more weathered demeanor, seemed to take a different approach. He studied Angela carefully, his eyes lingering on the way she carried herself, calm, poised, and utterly unafraid. Something about her didn't add up, and it was clear he knew it. "Ma'am," the older officer said, his voice quiet but firm, "I'm going to need you to identify yourself. If there's been a misunderstanding, we can sort it out. But we need to know who we're dealing with." His tone was measured, devoid of the hostility that dripped from Daniel's every word, but Angela still didn't flinch. She had no intention of revealing her identity, not yet. Doing so would blow her cover entirely, turning an already precarious situation into a full-blown crisis. "I've already told you," Angela said evenly. "This man is interfering with a federal operation. If you want answers, you'll get them soon enough, but not from me. My team is on the way." Her words hung in the air, carrying an authority that even the older officer couldn't dismiss outright. He frowned, clearly torn between protocol and the mounting sense that there was more to this woman than met the eye. Daniels, on the other hand, was having none of it. "Team?" he scoffed, his voice cracking slightly as he tried to regain control of the narrative. "This is a joke. You expect us to believe you're some kind of, what? Federal agent? Do you think we're stupid?" Angela didn't respond. She didn't need to. The weight of her silence was enough to make Daniel's words sound increasingly hollow. Around them, the restaurant had fallen into an uneasy hush, the patrons too afraid to intervene but too engrossed to look away. Some of them had begun filming discreetly, their phones held low but angled just enough to capture the scene. Angela noticed but didn't react. Let them film. The truth would speak for itself soon enough. Daniels took a step closer to her, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, a stark contrast to Angela's fluid grace. "You're coming with us?" he snarled, his voice losing what little composure it had left. "Now, or we'll make you." Angela's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She could feel the tension in the room reaching a breaking point, every second dragging it closer to an inevitable explosion. But before she could respond, the doors to the restaurant burst open again, and this time it wasn't uniformed officers who entered. Two men in dark suits strode into the room, their presence as commanding as it was unassuming. They moved with purpose, their expressions neutral but their eyes sharp, scanning the scene with practiced precision. Angela's relief was subtle but immediate. Her team had arrived. The cavalry was here. The taller of the two men, a broad-shouldered figure with a no-nonsense air, stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Angela first before shifting to Daniels. "Agent Carter," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that immediately silenced the room. "Are you all right?" Angela inclined her head slightly, her body relaxing just enough to signal that the situation was now under control. "I'm fine," she replied, her tone cool. "But we have a problem." The man nodded once, his expression unreadable, before turning to Daniels. "Officer," he said, his tone neutral but firm. "I'm going to need you to stand down." Daniels blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water as he struggled to process what was happening. "Stand down," he repeated, his voice rising. "Are you kidding me? Who the hell are you?" The man didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his jacket and produced a sleek black badge, flipping it open with a practiced motion. The golden emblem of the Secret Service glinted in the light, and for the first time Daniel's bravado faltered. His face paled, the color draining from it as the weight of his mistake began to sink in. "You've interfered with an active federal operation," the man continued, his tone unchanging. "And in doing so, you've not only compromised Agent Carter's mission, but also obstructed justice. I suggest you step back and let us handle this before you dig yourself into a deeper hole." Daniels stammered, his words incoherent as he tried to form a response. Behind him, the younger officer shifted uncomfortably, while his older partner let out a quiet sigh, as though he had seen this kind of mess too many times before. Angela watched silently, her expression unreadable as she let her team take the lead. The tension in the room had shifted dramatically, the power dynamic flipping in an instant. Daniels, once so sure of his authority, now looked small and out of place, a man out of his depth in waters he hadn't realized were far too deep for him. The taller agent stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Daniels. "We'll be filing a full report on this incident," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And you can expect a formal inquiry into your conduct. For now, I suggest you leave before you make things worse for yourself." Daniels opened his mouth to argue but quickly thought better of it. He cast one last glare at Angela, his expression a mix of anger and humiliation, before turning on his heel and storming out of the restaurant. The two uniformed officers hesitated for a moment before following, neither of them meeting Angela's gaze as they left. As the doors swung shut behind them, the tension in the room finally began to dissipate. Angela turned to her team, her shoulders relaxing slightly for the first time all afternoon. "The target's gone," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "We'll need to regroup and figure out our next move." The taller agent nodded, his expression serious. "We'll handle it," he said. "But first, let's get you out of here." Angela nodded, allowing herself a small sigh of relief as she followed her team toward the exit. The mission wasn't over, but for now, she had won the battle and ensured that justice, in one form or another, would be served. Angela Carter walked out of the restaurant, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and unspoken frustration. The incident with Officer Daniels had not only disrupted her carefully laid plans, but had also allowed her target to slip through the crack. For someone as meticulous and professional as Angela, this was an unacceptable outcome. She felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle over her shoulders, her thoughts already racing to salvage the mission. The two agents flanking her, one of them the tall, authoritative man who had diffused the standoff with Daniels, were silent, sensing the storm brewing within her. Outside, the streets bustled with the usual city life, completely oblivious to the chaos that had just unfolded inside the upscale restaurant. As they walked toward the black SUV parked discreetly around the corner, Angela turned to the taller agent, identified only as Davies. "The target," she began, her voice clipped. "Where did he go?" Her tone was calm, but there was an undercurrent of urgency that Davies didn't miss. He glanced at the other agent, who quickly pulled out a tablet and began scanning for updates. "We've got surveillance in the area," Davies said, his voice even. He didn't make it far. The last feed shows him heading toward a service alley 2 blocks south. He's likely trying to regroup or rendezvous with someone. Angela's jaw tightened. The service alley was a dead zone, out of range of their usual monitoring equipment, and the perfect place for a criminal to vanish. She reached for her own communication device, tapping into the encrypted channel used by her team. "This is Carter," she said, her tone sharp and decisive. "The target's moving south. I want units covering every exit point from that alley within the next 5 minutes. No mistakes." The response came immediately, a chorus of acknowledgements from her team scattered throughout the city. Angela handed the device back to Davis and stepped into the SUV, her mind already working through possible contingencies. The situation had escalated beyond what she anticipated, and now the pressure to regain control felt palpable. The vehicle started moving, weaving through the late afternoon traffic with calculated precision. Davis sat in the passenger seat, relaying updates from the field while Angela remained in the back, her gaze fixed on the streets outside. Her calm demeanor masked the storm of emotions beneath a combination of frustration, determination, and the simmering anger she felt toward Daniels for throwing the mission off course. Her thoughts were interrupted by the voice of the other agent, seated beside her. "There's chatter on one of the intercepted lines," he said, holding up his tablet. "It sounds like the target is trying to arrange for an extraction." Angela leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Who's he contacting?" "We're working on tracing it," the agent replied. "But the signal's bouncing through multiple proxies. Whoever it is, they know what they're doing." Angela frowned. This wasn't the first time she had encountered a criminal network capable of sophisticated countermeasures, but it didn't make the situation any less aggravating. The target wasn't just another low-level operative. He was someone with connections, someone who understood how to stay one step ahead. That made him dangerous. As the SUV approached the alley in question, Angela noticed the subtle movements of her team already in position. Plainclothes agents blended seamlessly with the pedestrians, while others in unmarked vehicles monitored the surrounding streets. Everything was in place for the next phase of the operation. Angela stepped out of the SUV, adjusting the earpiece in her ear as she surveyed the area. Davis joined her, his expression serious. "Surveillance picked up movement in the alley about 30 seconds ago," he said. "It's him. No visual on accomplices yet." Angela nodded, her eyes narrowing as she studied the entrance to the alley. "We move quietly," she said. "No unnecessary risks. If he's trying to make contact with someone, we need to know who." Davis signaled to the rest of the team, and the agents began to converge on the alley from multiple directions. Angela took point, her movements silent and deliberate as she entered the narrow passageway. The air was heavy with the smell of garbage and damp concrete, the dim light casting long shadows that seemed to shift with every step. At first, the alley appeared empty, but Angela's trained eyes quickly picked up on subtle details: a discarded cigarette still smoldering near a dumpster, a faint scuff mark on the ground leading toward the rear exit. Her hand moved instinctively toward the concealed weapon at her side, her senses on high alert. "Split up," she whispered into her earpiece. "Cover every angle." The agents fanned out, their movements coordinated and precise. Angela moved deeper into the alley, her gaze scanning every corner for signs of the target. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of the city beyond the walls of the narrow passage. Then she saw a flicker of movement near the far end of the alley, barely noticeable but enough to confirm her suspicions. She signaled to Davis, who quickly relayed the information to the rest of the team. Angela approached the area cautiously, her steps soundless on the concrete. As she rounded the corner, her eyes locked onto the figure of the target crouched near a stack of crates, his attention focused on the phone in his hand. He was speaking in hushed tones, his words too quiet to make out, but Angela could see the tension in his posture, the urgency of someone who knew time was running out. Without hesitation, Angela stepped forward, her voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "Drop the phone. Now." The target froze, his head snapping up to meet her gaze. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the air between them heavy with unspoken tension. Then, in one swift motion, he bolted, sprinting toward the rear exit of the alley. Angela reacted instantly, her body moving on instinct as she pursued him. The target was fast, but Angela was faster, her training and years of experience giving her the edge. She closed the distance quickly, her footsteps echoing off the walls as she rounded the corner just in time to see him push through a side door leading into an abandoned building. She didn't hesitate. Drawing her weapon, she entered the building, her senses heightened as she scanned the dark, cavernous space. The target's footsteps echoed ahead of her, a frantic rhythm that betrayed his panic. Angela moved swiftly but carefully, her weapon raised as she followed the sound. The building was a maze of empty rooms and decaying hallways, the air thick with dust and the faint stench of mildew. Angela could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, sharpening her focus as she closed in on her quarry. She could hear him now, his breathing ragged as he stumbled through the darkness, his desperation palpable. "Give it up," she called out, her voice steady and commanding. "You're not getting away." Her words were met with silence, but Angela knew better than to assume he was unarmed. She slowed her pace, her eyes scanning every shadow for signs of movement. Then, without warning, the target lunged out from a side corridor, a knife glinting in his hand as he slashed toward her. Angela reacted instantly, her reflexes honed to perfection. She sidestepped the attack, her arm coming up to deflect the blade as she delivered a swift, calculated strike to his wrist. The knife clattered to the ground, and the target let out a pained grunt as Angela twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees. "Game over," she said coldly, securing him with practiced efficiency. The rest of her team arrived moments later, their presence filling the space with a sense of finality. Angela stepped back, allowing Davis to take custody of the target as she caught her breath. The mission was far from over. There were still questions to answer, accomplices to track, and data to recover. But for now, Angela allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had regained control, despite the obstacles, and proven once again why she was one of the best in the business. Angela Carter stood just outside the crumbling building, her chest heaving as she worked to steady her breathing. The adrenaline coursing through her veins was still potent, every nerve in her body on edge. The apprehension of the target had been swift and decisive, but she knew all too well that the situation was far from resolved. Her target had been subdued, his hands tightly bound, but there was still the question of who he had been speaking to, who else might be involved, and what damage had already been done. Davis and the other agents were busy securing the man, but Angela's instinct screamed that something more was coming, something bigger. Her earpiece crackled to life, the sharp voice of one of her team members cutting through the ambient noise. "Carter, we've got movement at the perimeter. 2 vehicles just pulled up, unmarked. They're not ours." Angela's posture stiffened instantly, her hand moving reflexively to the weapon at her side. "Identify," she said sharply, already scanning the street for any sign of the incoming threat. The agent on the other end hesitated briefly before responding. "Can't confirm yet, but it looks like they're heavily armed. This isn't local law enforcement." Angela's mind raced, the implications hitting her like a freight train. The target's extraction team. Whoever he had been calling before she interrupted had clearly mobilized fast. She turned to Davis, her voice calm but firm. "We've got incoming. 2 vehicles, likely his backup. Get him out of here, secure him in the van, and move to secondary containment." Davis didn't hesitate. He gestured to the agents nearby, barking out orders to relocate the target immediately. Angela, meanwhile, stayed rooted in place, her sharp eyes scanning the street for any sign of the unmarked vehicles. She didn't have to wait long. A black SUV turned the corner at high speed, screeching to a halt just 50 feet away. Behind it, a second vehicle, identical in appearance, stopped in tandem. The doors opened almost simultaneously, and 4 men emerged, each one armed and moving with precision. They weren't amateurs. Angela could tell from the way they spread out, their movements calculated and professional. These weren't just hired thugs, they were operatives, possibly mercenaries, trained to handle high-stakes extractions. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't going to be a simple standoff. Angela clicked her earpiece. All units hold positions. Do not engage unless fired upon. We need to assess their intent. She stepped forward, her weapon held low but ready, her gaze fixed on the lead operative who was already approaching. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had been in situations like this before. He stopped a few paces away, his weapon still slung across his chest, and raised a hand as if to signal he wasn't here to start a firefight. Angela didn't lower her guard. She could see through the act this was a man who thrived on control and intimidation, and the raised hand was a mere formality. "Agent Carter," the man said, his voice calm but dripping with condescension. He clearly knew exactly who she was. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Hand him over and we can all walk away from this without unnecessary bloodshed." Angela's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. "And who exactly are you to make demands?" she asked, her tone sharp. She took another step forward, her weapon now raised slightly, a deliberate show of force. "This man is in federal custody, and you're interfering with a classified operation. I suggest you reconsider your position." The man's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "You're playing a dangerous game, Agent Carter," he said, his tone darkening. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Angela raised an eyebrow, unflinching. "I've been dealing with men like you my entire career," she shot back. "You're predictable. You think a show of force will make me back down? Let me save you the trouble, it won't." Behind her, she could hear Davis and the other agents moving the target into the van, their movements quick but controlled. Angela knew she needed to buy them more time. She kept her focus on the man in front of her, her mind racing as she calculated every possible scenario. The man's patience was wearing thin. He gestured to one of his operatives, who moved closer, his weapon now pointed directly at Angela. The tension in the air was electric, every second stretching into an eternity. Angela's finger hovered over the trigger of her own weapon, ready to act at the first sign of aggression. "You've got 10 seconds, the man said coldly, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Hand him over, or this gets ugly." Angela didn't flinch. Instead, she clicked her earpiece again, her voice steady as she issued a quiet command. "Go loud." The response was immediate. From the shadows, her team moved into position, their weapons trained on the operatives surrounding the SUVs. It was a show of force that rivaled the one the mercenaries had brought. And for the first time, Angela saw a flicker of uncertainty in the lead operative's eyes. "Your move," Angela said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The man hesitated, his gaze darting between Angela and the agents now surrounding them. He was weighing his options, calculating whether the extraction was worth the risk. Angela could see the moment he realized he was outmatched. He signaled to his team, and they began to lower their weapons, though their postures remained tense. "This isn't over," the man said, his voice low and filled with menace. "You're making enemies you can't afford." Angela didn't respond. She kept her weapon trained on him as he and his team retreated to their vehicles. The SUVs roared to life, speeding off into the distance, leaving behind only the faint scent of burning rubber. As the dust settled, Angela lowered her weapon, her sharp eyes scanning the street to ensure the threat was truly gone. Davis approached her, his expression a mix of relief and admiration. "That was intense," he said, his voice betraying just a hint of the adrenaline still coursing through him. Angela nodded, her focus already shifting back to the task at hand. "Get the target to the safe house," she said, her tone brisk. "I want a full debrief on what just happened, and find out who those operatives were. I want names, affiliations, everything." Davis nodded, moving to carry out her orders. Angela remained standing in the middle of the street, her gaze distant as she processed the events of the last few minutes. The mission was still on track, but the escalation had left its mark. Whoever was backing the target had resources, serious resources, and they weren't going to back down easily. Angela clicked her earpiece again, her voice firm. "This isn't over," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "Not by a long shot." With that, she turned and headed back toward the waiting SUV, her mind already planning the next move in a game that had just become far more dangerous. The safe house was cold and stark, tucked away in an unassuming industrial block on the edge of the city. Angela Carter stood at the center of the sparsely furnished room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she studied the man shackled to the steel chair before her. The target, whose name had been stripped of relevance in Angela's mind, was visibly rattled, his confidence eroded by the events of the day. Beads of sweat formed along his hairline, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape that didn't exist. He was trapped, and he knew it. Angela took a slow step forward, her boots clicking against the concrete floor with a deliberate rhythm that only heightened the man's unease. She carried an air of controlled menace, the kind that came from years of knowing exactly how to dismantle someone with precision, both physically and psychologically. "You've got one chance," she said, her voice calm but razor sharp. "Tell me who you were working with, and maybe, just maybe, I'll consider cutting you a deal." The man swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "You don't understand," he stammered, his voice thick with fear. "If I talk, they'll kill me. You don't know what these people are capable of." Angela's expression remained unchanged. "And if you don't talk," she said, leaning in slightly, her tone dropping to a dangerous whisper, "I promise you'll wish they had gotten to you first." Her words landed like a hammer, and the man visibly shrank under her gaze. He looked away, his lips pressing into a tight line, as if trying to summon some semblance of courage. Angela gave him no reprieve. "Clock's ticking," she added. "Make it easy on yourself." Behind her, Davis leaned against the wall, his arms folded as he observed the interrogation. He'd seen Angela work countless times, but her ability to strip someone down to their rawest, most vulnerable state never ceased to impress him. She wasn't just good, she was relentless. And she wasn't bluffing. If the man didn't give them what they needed, she wouldn't hesitate to escalate the situation. The target shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting back to Angela. "It doesn't matter what I say," he muttered finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "They'll find me. They'll find all of us." Angela tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Who?" she demanded. "Names, locations, contacts. Start talking." The man hesitated again, his fear of his unseen allies warring with the immediate threat Angela represented. It was a losing battle. She could see it in the way his shoulders slumped slightly, in the way his breathing quickened as the walls closed in around him. Finally, he cracked. "It's a network," he admitted, his voice trembling. "They operate out of multiple hubs: cybercrime, arms trafficking, data smuggling. I'm just a courier. I move files. That's it." He looked up at Angela, desperation in his eyes. "I don't know who runs it. I swear." Angela's expression remained unreadable, but internally, her mind was racing. She'd heard whispers of such a network before, but nothing concrete. This confirmation, though limited, was a significant breakthrough. Still, she needed more. "What files?" she pressed. "What was in the folder you handed off today?" The man hesitated again, his eyes flicking toward Davis as if looking for an ally. He found none. "Blueprints," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "For a federal data center. They're planning something big." Angela's jaw tightened. This wasn't just another smuggling operation, this was national security, and it was already in motion. She stepped back, giving the man room to breathe as she processed the information. "Who was supposed to receive the blueprints?" she asked, her voice steady but urgent. "I don't know," the man admitted quickly, his words spilling out in a rush. The drop point was neutral third party. "All I know is the buyer was international. High level." Angela nodded slowly, her mind already assembling the pieces. If the blueprints had made it into the wrong hands, the consequences could be catastrophic. "Davis," she said without turning around, "alert the cyber division. I want every potential drop point in this city flagged and secured. And get a list of international buyers who could have the resources to pull something like this off." Davis nodded, pulling out his phone to relay her orders. Meanwhile, Angela turned back to the target. "You just gave me a lot of information," she said, her tone cold but precise. "If you're lying about any of it, I'll know. And if I find out you're holding back, this conversation will get a lot less pleasant." The man nodded frantically, his fear palpable. "I told you everything," he said. "I swear." Angela didn't respond. Instead, she stepped back, signaling to Davis to take over. She needed a moment to think, to strategize. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they painted was dark and full of potential disaster. The operation wasn't over, not even close. She stepped out of the interrogation room, the heavy steel door closing behind her with a resounding thud. The corridor outside was dimly lit, its walls lined with monitors displaying live feeds from surveillance cameras across the city. Angela stopped in front of one of the screens, her eyes narrowing as she studied the images. Her team had flagged several locations as potential drop points, and agents were already moving to secure them. But something felt off, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Her thoughts were interrupted by the buzz of her phone. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a secure message from headquarters. The contents made her stomach drop. ALRT, confirm compromise of secondary data facility. Multiple breaches detected. Potential insider involvement. Angela's mind reeled. The network had already moved, exploiting the chaos of the day to strike at a secondary location. They were faster, more coordinated than she'd anticipated. And now the stakes had just risen exponentially. She spun on her heel, re-entering the interrogation room with renewed urgency. "Who else is involved?" she demanded, her voice sharper now, cutting through the man's feeble attempts to catch his breath. "Who's feeding them intel from the inside?" The man looked genuinely confused, his brow furrowing as he shook his head. "I don't know," he said, his voice cracking. "I swear I don't. I'm just a runner." Angela's patience was wearing thin. "Think," she said, her tone deadly. "Someone gave them access. Someone on the inside. Names, faces, anything." "I don't know." The man stammered, his panic rising. "They don't tell me that kind of stuff. I just follow orders. Angela stepped back, clenching her fists to steady herself. She could tell he was telling the truth, or at least as much of it as he knew. But that only made the situation worse. The network was layered, compartmentalized, and whoever was running it had ensured that the lower-level operatives like this man were expendable and uninformed. It was a masterstroke of design, and it meant Angela was still 2 steps behind. Davis stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder to steady her. "We'll figure this out," he said quietly. "We've got the target. We've got a lead. It's a start." Angela exhaled slowly, nodding. He was right. It wasn't much, but it was something, and she wasn't about to let the network slip through her fingers again. "Lock him down," she said, her voice firm. "We're not done with him yet." She turned to Davis, her eyes burning with determination. "And get me everything we have on that breach. If there's a mole in our system, I want them found. Now." The sound of the heavy steel door locking behind Angela Carter echoed through the quiet corridor, signaling the end of the interrogation. She walked purposefully down the narrow hallway, her expression unreadable, her mind working through the layers of complications that had unraveled during the operation. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a clearer picture, but the image it revealed was far more dangerous than she had initially imagined. A high-level international network, blueprints for a federal data center, and now a confirmed insider breach. This was no longer just an operation. It was a full-blown crisis. Angela stepped into the command center, where a wall of monitors displayed live feeds from the city and intelligence reports streaming in from headquarters. Her team moved with precision, a chorus of quiet urgency filling the room as agents relayed updates and coordinated their next moves. Davis stood near the central console, his arms crossed as he reviewed the latest report. When he saw Angela enter, he straightened, his expression grim. "We have confirmation on the breach," he said without preamble, handing her a tablet. "Secondary data facility was hit less than an hour ago. It was a coordinated cyber-physical attack. They took everything: server schematics, security protocols, personnel rosters. If these blueprints make it to the wrong hands, they'll know exactly how to dismantle our defenses." Angela scanned the report, her eyes narrowing. "Do we know who's behind it?" Davis shook his head. "Not yet, but we're starting to see patterns in the network activity. Whoever's running this is smart layered proxies, multiple dead drops, and redundancies we haven't encountered before. They anticipated every move we made today." Angela set the tablet down, her mind racing. "What about the insider? Any leads?" Davis nodded. "We've flagged 3 potential suspects based on access logs and unusual activity in the last 24 hours. 2 of them are low-level staff, unlikely candidates for this level of coordination. But the third," he hesitated, his expression darkening. "The third is someone with direct access to high-security systems. Someone who's been with us for years." Angela's jaw tightened. A traitor in their midst. It wasn't a surprise this kind of operation couldn't have happened without inside help, Patel confirmed, sent to feet down her spine. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice sharp. Davis hesitated again before answering. "Deputy Director Frazier." The name hit Angela like a punch to the gut. Frazier wasn't just a colleague, he was a mentor, someone she had trusted implicitly since her early days in the agency. The thought of him being involved in something like this felt inconceivable, but the evidence was mounting. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay focused. There was no room for sentimentality now. "Do we have proof?" she asked. "Not yet," Davis admitted. but his access logs show unauthorized entries into classified systems, and his communication records are suspiciously too clean. Either he's covering his tracks or someone's framing him. Angela nodded, her mind already forming a plan. We can't make a move without concrete evidence. If we tip our hand too soon, we risk losing everything. Davis looked uneasy. What do you want to do? Angela's gaze hardened. Set a trap. If Frazier's involved, he'll make a move to cover his tracks once he realizes we're onto him. And if he's being framed, we'll force whoever's behind it to show their hand. Davis nodded, already moving to relay her orders to the team. Angela turned back to the monitors, her eyes scanning the live feeds for anything out of place. The city looked calm on the surface, but she knew better. The network they were up against was still out there, and they weren't going to stop until their mission was complete. Neither was she. Hours passed in a blur of coordinated activity. Angela worked tirelessly alongside her team, reviewing intel, refining their strategies, and anticipating the network's next move. Every piece of information they uncovered brought them closer to the truth, but also revealed the full extent of the danger they faced. This wasn't just about blueprints or insider threats, it was about control, leverage, and the systematic dismantling of the nation's most critical defenses. Finally, as dawn broke over the city, the breakthrough came. A flagged communication between the target they had captured and an unknown contact revealed the next phase of the network's plan, an encrypted data exchange scheduled to take place at a private airfield on the outskirts of the city. It was their best chance to intercept the remaining operatives and recover the stolen information. Angela wasted no time. She rallied her team, issuing orders with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. The airfield was already under surveillance, but now it would be locked down completely. Agents were positioned at every possible entry and exit point, their movements synchronized to ensure no one escaped. As the team mobilized, Angela felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, tempered by the weight of responsibility that came with leading such an operation. She had no room for error, not when the stakes were this high. The operation unfolded with military precision. Angela's team moved in silence, their movements swift and coordinated as they surrounded the airfield. The suspects arrived exactly as predicted, their blacked-out SUVs pulling onto the tarmac under the cover of darkness. Angela watched from her position, her sharp eyes tracking every movement as the suspects exited their vehicles and began unloading a series of locked cases. She gave the signal, and the operation began. Agents converged on the suspects from all sides, their weapons drawn as they issued commands. The suspects didn't go quietly. A firefight erupted, the crack of gunfire echoing across the airfield as Angela and her team worked to subdue the operatives. It was chaotic, dangerous, and over in minutes. When the dust settled, the suspects were in custody, their weapons confiscated, and the locked cases secured. Angela approached one of the cases, her heart pounding as she keyed in the override code to open it. Inside, she found exactly what she had been hoping for and dreading: hard drives, encrypted devices, and documents that confirmed the full extent of the network's plans. It was worse than she had imagined. The blueprints were only the beginning. The network had been planning a series of coordinated attacks, targeting infrastructure, communications, and key government facilities. The stolen data would have allowed them to bypass security protocols and cripple the nation's defenses. Angela felt a surge of relief that they had stopped it in time, but also a deep sense of unease. This wasn't the end. The network was still out there, and their leader remained unidentified. As the suspects were loaded into transport vehicles and the evidence secured, Angela allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The mission had been a success, but it had come at a cost. The betrayal within their ranks, the lives put at risk, and the knowledge that they were facing an enemy capable of such precision and coordination, it all weighed heavily on her. Davis approached her, his expression a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. "We did it," he said simply. Angela nodded, her gaze distant. "For now," she said. "But this isn't over." He studied her for a moment before speaking again. "Frazier's been placed under surveillance. If he's involved, we'll know soon." Angela sighed, the weight of the revelation still pressing on her. "If he's guilty," she said quietly, "I'll deal with it." Davis didn't press further. He knew better than to question Angela when her mind was set. Instead, he nodded and walked away, leaving her alone on the tarmac. The first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, casting the airfield in a golden glow. Angela stood there for a moment, the enormity of the mission settling over her. She knew the fight was far from over, but for now they had bought themselves time to regroup, to uncover the network's leader, and to prepare for whatever came next. As she turned and walked toward the waiting sub, her expression hardened with resolve. This was her job, her responsibility. And she wasn't about to let any one traitor or operative undermine the safety of the nation she had sworn to protect.